The 1996 Le Mans 24 Hours, the 64th running of this great endurance classic, and everything was in place for what was lined up to be the best 24 hours for years. Of course, the pomp and circumstance at Le Mans is always of the highest order. The atmosphere, absolutely electric, particularly before the start. There's Jean-Pierre Jarier, one of the veterans of the race. Justin Bell there on the right, he finished third last year. And a very strong American entry joins the regular lineup of top Japanese cars. Just look at this bit of fun, perfectly orchestrated, and the crowd absolutely loved it. There's the Nissan factory team, back once again. Philippe Alliot in the middle there, former Grand Prix driver. And Derek Bell on the left, obviously a master of this race. And Eric van der Poel, one of the fastest in qualifying. There are a number of special awards to be made by Francois Fillon, the president of the ACO. The first one went to the four-time winner, Henry Pescarolo, competing in his 30th Le Mans. The media prize went to TV Asahi. They have supported the race for the last 15 years. The award collected by Mr. Hattori.
Vos applaudissements pour TV Asahi pour la fidélité, 15 ans ici au 24 heures.
The Japanese television fans love this race. And then finally an award to a representative from Chrysler for their endeavour in bringing the wonderful thundering Vipers to Le Mans. 4 of those cars entered. And good to see Chrysler back at Le Mans for the first time since the 1920s. Gordon Murray there, who designed last year's winning McLaren, that car winning first time out last year, but they knew that this year it was going to be very tough indeed. Amongst the drivers on the entry list, Mario Andretti, the former Indy and World Championship winner, still looking for victory at Le Mans. Nelson Piquet, the 3 times world champion, making his debut here in the BMW Motorsport back team. As we said earlier, one of the finest entries for many years, 48 competitive cars. That's Didier Taze driving one of the Yost Porsches. There is Philippe Alliot with the younger drivers, Policant and Cotaz. They're driving together in a Courage Porsche. And Ferrari returning seriously to Le Mans for the first time in many years. Eric van der Poel there, the Belgian who we saw in that cowboy hat a little earlier, with Andy Evans' entry, the Racing for Belgium entry. 1001 Belgian enthusiasts had helped get the car on the grid. And Porsche returned, of course, with the new GT1 cars. They are built specially for this race, and they certainly look very promising in qualifying. What a lineup of drivers there. And that's Bob Wallach, a man who has never won this race but has come close so many times. The Yost Porsche driven by Davy Jones, the American, Manuel Reuter, and by the young Austrian Alex Wurz. And here's another of the quick open-top cars from America, Pace, Taylor and Sharp in the Danker car. They'd already won the 24 Hours of Daytona. Let's take a look at the grid. The GT cars lined up on the left-hand side, the open-top WSC and sports prototype, Le Mans prototype cars on the right-hand side. And on the pole was the TWR Porsche of Taze, Martini and Alboreto. So we see the grid, row 3, that Ferrari up there. A lot of people thought that was a potential winner. The best of the McLarens, last year's winners, of course, the McLaren team. The Golf car, JJ Leto on row 4. Then that Riley and Scott car, which had won at Sebring and Daytona, looking for the Triple Crown. Then on row 6, Mario Andretti, definitely a man to watch for in the Courage. He'd finished second in that car last year. On row 7, the car carrying number 1, Christophe Bouchou, a former winner with Lassig and Toivonen. Then on row 8, one of the intriguing little single-seater WRs. They'd been slowed down this year, they had to carry more weight. On row 9, a car that all the British fans were cheering, the Lister Jaguar, in the colours of Newcastle United Football Club. That's the top 20 cars out of a total of 48. Some Ferrari fans there. But no question of doubt, the noisiest fans were the large British group, over 60,000 Brits cramming into Le Mans again, and most of them cheering for the Lister, the best of the front-engine cars on the grid. French movie star Alain Delon waved the great tricolour, and off they went, and the big was that the two Porsches went straight into the lead, the GT1 cars. Remember, this is their debut race, and it was expected that the prototypes would immediately lead, but that wasn't the case. Remember that the prototypes have smaller fuel tanks. They have to carry 80 litres, while the GT cars have 100 litres, and the GT cars also tend to be less thirsty, so it's expected that they would be a little slower at the beginning. There was various trade-offs in the regulations, but right at the start it was the Porsche of Yannick Dalmas which led from Bob Wallach. Into third place, Eric van der Poel in the Ferrari, but in a 24-hour race, really drivers shouldn't be drawn into a Grand Prix. There's a long, long way to go on this magnificent 8-mile circuit. Some of it, of course, carved out on the public roads. In particular, the main road from Le Mans to Tours. If you're ever driving in the west of France and you travel down that road, think about the men who have raced here at over 200 miles an hour. Mulsanne corner for the first time. The two Porsche GT1s, the factory cars, developed at Weissach in Germany, in the lead, first and second. Cars number 25 and 26. Then the Ferrari. Then after them, Christophe Bouchou made a good start at the beginning. Here's various McLaren F1s. That's J.J. Leto, the wheel of the Golf car. J.J. Leto, of course, one of the drivers of the winning machine last year. Yannick Dalmas, Carl Wendlinger and Scott Goodyear. Scott Goodyear, the Canadian, making his comeback to motor racing after a horrifying accident in the opening IndyCar race of the year. And the two Porsches seem to have a little private battle at the beginning. The number 25 car, driven by Stuck, Boutsen and Volek, and on lap 2 we had one of the front runners off. Andy Evans, who owns the Scantia team, who have entered these two Ferraris, making an unenforced error and losing a lot of time for that Ferrari. But back then, with the leading two Porsches, our camera car is the number 25 machine, with Hans Stuck, Thierry Boutsen and Bob Wallach, the three very experienced drivers. Andy Evans brings the Ferrari in. Look at the damage to the front. But he had been stuck in the gravel trap for a little while. But meanwhile, look at this battle at the front and going all the way through. Really driving hard in the early stages. The Jost Porsche, number 8, Pierluigi Martini, Michele Alboreto and Didier Tays. See the little flick of the finger? Eric van der Poel saying to the second Jost crew, oh, find your way through there. It's Davy Jones at the wheel, incidentally. So, as the race headed towards the end of the first hour, we had this exciting action as the Jost Porsche, the white and red car, driven by Didier Tays, moved into second place, immediately followed by his teammate. So the factory Porsche GTs had been split by the two Jost machines. Flames coming out of that Toyota, and at the front the four Porsche powered cars had broken away, and then Didier Tays moved into the lead through the chicane. So the early leader, the Belgian there, and you can see already that the rest of the cars have dropped away. These open-top cars are a design commissioned by Porsche from the TWR organisation, but had never previously been raced. They were looking very strong indeed. More excellent in-car action. We see that overtaking manoeuvre. An early mistake came from one of the Eureka team Vipers, the Dominic Dupree, Justin Bell, Perry McCarthy car having a spin at the chicane. You have to try and keep out of that gravel because it really can suck you in. There's Davy Jones, the American, very experienced, has raced for Jaguar in the past. And 15 laps completed in the first hour. A pit stop for the number 3, Alio Cortaz Policand Courage. There is Jerome Policand, the Formula 3000 experienced Frenchman, ready to get into the car. Garage, the company from just down the road, actually building their cars in Le Mans, had 3 cars entered. Change of rubber there, and these open-top cars are allowed to run slightly wider tyres than the GT cars like this one, so that might well be a factor. Tyres were very definitely a part of the strategy, and it was thought that these open-top cars, while they had to stop more often for fuel, may be able to make quicker pit stops because they were more gentle actually on their tyres. Here's that Riley and Scott Oldsmobile, the car which, as I said earlier, was seeking that Triple Crown, having won both the big endurance races in America, Sebring and Daytona, but in the early running was proving very thirsty indeed. A pit stop for the initial leader there. And a big spin for the Ferrari F40, the number 56 car, Michel Ferte, Oliver Trevenant and Nicolas Lebosetier. That car would have several excursions during the race meeting. There, the Marcos Chevrolet. And some more slow-mo action here of a front puncture for the number 49 Viper, the Vic Sifton, Alain Cadini, John Morton car, entered by Kanaska Southwind Motorsport. Here the Marcos thundering along, the fastest contender in the GT2 category, driven by the Dutchman Cor Oyser. Now here's a man with an interesting story, accelerating out of the pits in the Kramer STP Porsche. That's Steve Fossett, who holds records in yachting and ballooning, endurance records, looking to try and expand all that knowledge to the Le Mans 24-hour race. This is his second time here. The fastest of the McLarens, Ray Belm, James Weaver, JJ Leto, a very quick trio. There's Weaver at the wheel. That car was running well inside the top 10. And the first major retirement. We saw that car spin a little earlier, but then it ran out of fuel out on the racetrack. Big disappointment for Andy Evans, who, when he's not racing, is the Chief Financial Officer of Microsoft. And another early problem for the second of the Kramer cars, the number 1 car, Christophe Bouchot. That's actually Jürgen Lassig at the wheel there, and that car in gear selection problems. And they would eventually limp it back to the pits, but it wasn't to be a major contender. This car certainly was. The number 25 machine of Stuck, Boutsen and Wallach. The pattern was already set in this 1996 Le Mans 24 hours. As we see a change there, being strapped in Paul Belmondo, son of the famous French actor. And he's sharing that Ferrari F40 with Eric Bernard. And just watch this. This is Jan Lammers, cuts across in front of the WR. Problems with the electrics of the Courage, the one which was being shared by Derek Warwick, a man of great Formula One experience, and the even more experienced Mario Andretti, who put the whole sponsorship package together. They finished second last year, but problems this year, and then Lammers was left stranded in the pit road. The electronics had died. The marshals allowed at Le Mans to push a car up to the pit to a certain point, and then the driver had to take over. Little Jan Lammers there, enormously experienced, very fast indeed, working hard. Meanwhile, with a similar flat 6 Porsche engine, but having no problems at all, we just saw going out the Jos Porsche. We had another spin from the pilot's Aldex Ferrari F40. Fortunately, the car finishes up pointing in the right direction. Flames out of the back. And then the other Kramer Porsche limping round. It was a most unhappy event for the Kramer team, who've won this event in the past. Here's their other car, Bouchot, Harry Toivonen, Jürgen Lassig. Back then, riding with the number 25 car past the pits. Alex Wirtz there, the man who has one red driving boot and one blue one. A little bit of superstition from the young Austrian. Now we ride briefly in the Nissan. There is that front-engined car based on the Skyline. And a pit stop. There's Carl Wendlinger, the former Sauber Grand Prix driver, ready to get in. Out climbs Scott Goodyear of Canada. Meanwhile, there's a sad sight. Return to the pits is that Ferrari out of the race. Here's the triple rotary Mazda running in the LMP2 class, and there Wendlinger accelerating out of the pits. Hans Stuck is our driver in the camera car right now. There you see his famous helmet, and he was really hustling the car around, chasing the Courage Porsche. This is the French-driven one. And dives down the inside, and a touch, and possibly a little bit of damage to the underside of the factory Mobil-sponsored GT1 with that intriguing colour scheme. Well, fans come of all ages at Le Mans. Let's just see that again. And, well, I think the Courage hadn't seen the Porsche coming. It was obviously quicker, and a bit of a trip through the gravel, and that can do quite a bit of damage. I think it's Alio at the wheel of the Courage. Meanwhile, still really flying around the circuit. Definitely the fastest car out there as they go onto the Mulsanne straight from Tête Rouge. Meanwhile, you have a car without a front wheel, and that's the LM of Gonard, Petit and Roston. I think that's Patrick Gonard at the wheel. So 3 wheels on my wagon. Just look at the wheel nut going with it. See the metal wheel nut bouncing. The tyre goes into the Armco barrier. That can be very dangerous indeed, because it can bounce back in front of the competitors. Fortunately, it didn't happen this time, and you see the Ferrari of Eric van der Poel approaching. Then a spin from Derek Warwick in the pit road. A big embarrassment for Del Boy, having to execute a 3, or was it 5-point turn. Finally gets it round. Derek had really been pressing on, trying to make up for a lot of lost time after that car had had the various ignition problems and electronic problems which had hampered it. Really, it had no chance of victory, but it was still hoping for a top 10 finish. So Warwick brings his car into the pits. And let's just recap on some of the retirements. We saw the Ferrari, the Evans car, stopped. That was out of fuel. The Langton O'Rourke Holmes Porsche GT2 retired at the end of the 3rd hour with a engine failure. And the Belmondo Gounon Bernard was another early retirement. Then came this significant retirement. The Swede there, Stanley Dickens, a former winner, having a very big accident indeed at the corner called Indianapolis. The whole rear of the STP car ripped off, but fortunately the Swede was able to walk away. There you see the car spinning down the Armco. And so that machine out of the race. That accident taking place after 58 laps, just a quarter distance. But meanwhile, at the front, it was still the Jones-Reuter-Verse car in the lead, as another, of course, excursion there, going around a slower car for the factory GT1 Porsche. That red car leading GT2, Rook Racing, Bruno Eichmann amongst the drivers after the demise of the Marcos Chevrolet with engine problems. And we'll get another chance to look at that big moment for the factory Porsche. Not sure if I think it's Boutsen at the wheel there of the number 25 car, and damage to the front spoiler as he goes round the Saab Toyota. And that was a very vital, significant moment in this race. It's actually Hans Stuck at the wheel, because that necessitated a pit stop, and the amount of time it took to fix that was perhaps more than the car eventually lost by. Certainly something to ponder. Here was the position after 5 hours. The first of the Jost Porsches ahead of the first of the GT Porsches, the second Jost car, and then the second factory Porsche GT. In 5th place, the best McLaren, the Golf car. That's Manuel Reuter in the lead car there. Reuter, who now races mainly in the ITC series in an Opel. Meanwhile, here's that GT2 leading car making a pit stop. Ralph Kellener's there, getting into the car. Ralph Kellener's, who has had tremendous success in similar cars in the German GT Championship in the Porsche Super Cup. And that German team looking really strong considering their lack of knowledge of the circuit here. And another moment for the 25 car, one of the slower Porsche 911s, certainly gets a bit wide, but this time Stuck manages to scrape through, keeping it on the tarmac Adams. Meanwhile, in the pits, Porsche 26 getting some repairs to the bodywork, and here is a car which is going to need some repairs to the bodywork. The left rear has blown out on the Augusta team Corvette. And just look at the smoke, the tyre delaminating, bits flying off it, and that in turn is damaging the bodywork, the Callaway Corvette. And just look at the pieces flying off it. And that car being torn to shreds. Unbelievable. Look at the destruction there. Now another huge piece of bodywork flies off, and then another. Well, if that car gets back to the pits, there will be a lot of work to be done. So, drama on the Mulsanne straight. Here we see the car, and just look, the whole rear end's gone now. And quite a lot of mechanical damage being done too. But really, that driver should slow down and just limp the car at 5 miles an hour in. Capelli, Augusta and Camus in the only Corvette taking part in the race this year. The Callaway, the new Callaway cars failed to get through the pre-qualification process. Now here's that man, Henri Pescarolo, in his 30th running. And again we see that Corvette limping in, being destroyed as it goes by the flailing remains of the tyre. Now there is Aguri Suzuki, a man with a great deal of Grand Prix experience in the Nissan. Nissans with their front-engine Skyline-based cars were struggling to get into the top 20, in fact. And Porsche passing McLaren. This wasn't expected. The McLarens really were expected to stay on terms with the Porsches, but in the event, they had no answer for the speed of the factory cars. Neither did Nissan. That's the number 22 car. Now a shot from that airship, and we look down again on the GT1 Porsche. Remember, these cars had never previously raced. Porsche deciding the end of last year to compete officially in this year's Le Mans and to build these GT1 cars, the first mid-engine rather than rear-engine Porsches ever to race at Le Mans. And you can see there just how well the circuit is manicured, the chicane before the Dunlop Bridge. And just look at the magnificent circuit below us as we go back to the leader, still with Reuter at the wheel. This car never more than 50 or 60 seconds ahead of the pursuing Porsche GT1. And problems for Honda, the privately entered NSX, the number 75 car, struggling in another one with a rear puncture. The team Kunimitsu Honda still pushing hard. That's Bob Wallach now at the wheel of the 25 car. Look at the front disc brakes. You'll see them as it comes into the picture, glowing cherry red. That shows just how hard they were trying that GT factory machine. And here also glowing red, the brakes on the number 26 machine. That prepares to pass the Pina-backed Bugatti run McLaren BMW. And that graphic there showing now that the car you see going through your frame had dropped 2 laps behind its sister machine after some minor problems. More action at the chicane, and hits that blue F40 again, going for another wild spin. Something of a torrid race for them. The tyre smoke coming up, the flames popping out of the exhaust. And that is a very tricky entrance to that chicane. The number 5 Courage Porsche was still going very strongly. Pescarolo backed up by Emmanuel Collard and Frank Lagorce. That car was well inside the top 10, having a good run indeed. This is the Fabien Giroud, Maurizio Santrosala, Jean-Denis Delatraz, McLaren being pushed away. First of the McLarens to succumb. And you just heard the whistle there of the turbocharger pop-off valve. As you can see now, the lights coming down. There's Yannick Dalmas in the pits. And a stop-go penalty for the Lister, going too fast in the pit road. There were very few of those, actually. Meanwhile, the leader, Manuel Breuter, brings the car in. Davy Jones puts his seat in. Davy Jones, who finished second in the Indianapolis 500 this year. New tyres go on. And out accelerates the TWR built Jost Porsche. And just notice a little bit of exhaust smoke. See Davy Jones in the corner of our picture. And so, after 7 hours of racing, the sun came down at Le Mans on the 2 Jost Porsches, first and second. And by then, very briefly indeed, that number 33 McLaren had moved up to 3rd place. At last, there was some hope for the team from England. Here, the remaining Ferrari, the Belgian-driven car. That car had been expected to lead, but was proving a little bit of a disappointment, having various problems along the way. Eric van der Poel climbs aboard. Then the most vital process of strapping him in, and then off goes Van der Poel, who was driving with 2 young Belgians, Mark Goossens and Eric Baccalar. And that car had actually managed to work its way up to 6th spot. Not even in the top 10 thus far. The car which led for so long last year, the Harrods McLaren, Andy Wallace, driving again with Derek Bell, and also this time with Oliver Griard, the DPR run car. They'd had various problems with the clutch, with the gearbox, with the brakes, which had slowed that car. Still a very long way to go. The race not halfway through at this point. And of course, one of the many things which brings the huge crowds back to Le Mans every year is the special atmosphere, sounds and smells of racing at night, the lights piercing through the darkness. For the mechanics, of course, it's just all hard work. It's usually in the middle of the night they finish up having to change things like disc brakes. This is the car leading the GT2 category. There you see the lineup of GT2 cars, nearly all Porsches, just the one Honda amongst the top 6. There is Ralph Kellerers. In second place in that category, the group led by the New Zealander Bill Farmer, who was recreating the victory of New Zealanders Denny Holm and Chris Amon back 30 years earlier. Another good pit stop for the Jost team. At the wheel, young Alex Wirtz, having his first Le Mans 24 hours and doing an outstanding job, really backing up the 2 much more experienced drivers very well indeed. Pierluigi Martini, the highly experienced former Formula One driver, climbs out of the other TWR built machine. sharing that car with Didier Tays, who's raced a great deal in Indy cars in America. And also with Michele Alboreto, the former Ferrari and Tyrrell Grand Prix driver. What a lineup they had. And Michele Alboreto, another man that is now racing in America. Alboreto, Martini and Tays. That car running second for much of the first 12 hours. Meanwhile, the number 26 Porsche had dropped down to 7th place. Quite a lot of time lost in the pits repairing the damage to the front bodywork. And then there was drama in the pits for that blue Ferrari. This pits fire very quickly extinguished. Still see some flames there. The driver out rather late. But that actually spelled the end for the Pilot Aldix team. And the end to a Le Mans that I'm sure they'd rather forget. There were problems amongst the Dodge Vipers. This car being pushed back into the garage area. Oil pump failure on a couple of the cars, which necessitated substantial repairs. And the Dupuis Justin Bell McCarthy car finally retiring with engine problems at the halfway mark. Frank Lagorce there, explaining to the garage engineer some problem. Meanwhile, more fuel for the number 26 machine, trying to battle its way back up the order. And obviously a lot of work required on the Pescarolo machine. So that is pushed back into the garage. Here with the number 49 Viper, Cadini, Morton and Sifton. The Danker Riley and Scott car, that one seeking that Triple Crown, had not been running as strongly as many people thought. It had been very thirsty on fuel. But that number 25 car was running like clockwork. And here's Derek Warwick taking that other garage back into the race, and that was now climbing back up the field from a very lowly position indeed. And it looks as if it's possible that it might make a top 10 finish. But let's just check out the positions in the night after almost 10 hours. The two Jost Porsches first and second, then the 25 factory Porsche GT, then the Leto McLaren, and then the best of the garages in 5th place. That's the French-driven one. Meanwhile, all the fun of the fair, absolutely essential if you go to Le Mans. Whoa, dearie me, the Big Dipper. Well, lots of excitement there. This man's trying to get a little sleep as the ear plugs in. And meanwhile, we'll see a change on the screen because the Porsche number 25 moved up to 2nd place. For some, they're off to bed, but for others, there's hard work, like these journalists there in the media room. Well, he's certainly enjoying it, and there were plenty of stories out there. 2 or 3 more cars retiring, including the Augusta team Corvette we saw in trouble earlier. Mario Andretti still trying to work that car back up the field after those early problems. Here's another former world champion, Nelson Piquet. They were having quite a lot of problems with their McLaren. No problems at all for the number 25 Porsche. It was running like clockwork. There is Carl Wendlinger. Carl now races in the German Touring Car Series, and here's Eric van der Poel. Loves that cowboy hat. Bit of work on his crash helmet to make sure no misting up during the night. Another top Grand Prix driver of the 1970s, Jacques Lafitte, also in the Bugatti team. When the sun came up, there've been few retirements actually, and not too much change at the front. The R&S Oldsmobile had dropped out with a gearbox transmission problem. But at the front, it was still the battle continuing between the two Jost Porsches and the factory Porsche GT team, with the number 26 car starting to move back into the top 5. Well, little chap there slept through it all. And so the number 7 car still led from the 25 GT car, and then the second of the Jost cars, number 8. Then the McLaren, number 33, the Golf Leto machine. And this car had gone well in the top 5 all through the night, the Courage, but in the early morning, Philippe Alliot crashed this Courage very heavily indeed. Walks away from that crumple device. Alliot, Cotaz and Polican. There is Alliot. Not surprisingly looking a little ashen-faced. And that car, the best of the Courages, which had run so well, was definitely out of the race. Just look at the travel stains, the carbon dust down the side of the 8 Yost Porsche, with Michele Alboreto returning to the racetrack in 3rd place. Well, these Yost Porsches, there's the other one in the lead, had never previously raced. They were built for the 1995 Daytona 24 Hours. Finally, the Ferrari challenge ended like this. A huge spin under the bridge from Eric Bachelard, wiped off a front wheel. He was uninjured, but all Ferrari's hopes ended right there. We can see it again. The car pirouetting down the track. It's already made contact with the Armco barrier on the right-hand side. You see the marshals waving and the Lister having to take avoiding action. That Lister had been running inside the top 20, cheered on always by the British fans. Still at the top, the number 7. A little concern about that smoke. And here was the pursuer, and rarely was there more than 50 seconds or so between those 2 lead cars. It was an intriguing battle. Remember that the open top car has to stop more often for fuel, but the stops don't last so long. The GT cars, they can go a little longer on their fuel, almost an hour, but sometimes their pit stops take about 15 or 20 seconds longer. The first real drama for the Yost team came when Pierluigi Martini went straight on at the chicane, afterwards telling journalists that he'd hit a whole flock of mosquitoes which covered up the visor on his crash helmet, tried to wipe it, and in the process lost control, but fortunately managed to get it more or less slowed down before he nudged those tyres there at the first chicane, and that dropped that car back quite a long way. There it is now running again with Didier Taze at the wheel. And here was a defining point in this motor race. The leading car, that's the second in our picture, about to lap the 2nd place car. In 3rd place, the 33 machine, and then you see the 2nd Yost Porsche drop to 4th place after that incident. So after he finally poised battle throughout the night, advantage was finally going the way of the PWR Yost Porsche. Meanwhile, more problems for Mario Andretti. That car had been hauled all the way back up to 9th place. Then Mario had this off-road excursion. The car stuck in the gravel at the Indianapolis corner, and assistance had to be sought, and that took quite a lot of time, and that dropped it down the field again. We see exactly what happened. Mario going in too hard, really going in very quickly indeed. Fortunately, the gravel slowing down the Courage C36. So a problem there for the great American champion. There, eventually the car pulled out. Look how much gravel it's scooping up. Time, of course, being lost while all this is happening. And they had to get the shovels and spades out. And it was finally extracted from there. But here is the 33 car, the one that had run so strongly, the best of the McLarens, as finally Mario gets the car underway again with the bodywork deranged at the front. But there was concern in the Gulf pit, because on the radio they'd heard that the 33 car had got problems with the gearbox. Meanwhile, look at all that gravel coming out and showering the 2nd placed Porsche. Page handing over to Alboreto. Meanwhile, that garage pit had been a busy place almost throughout the 24 hours. all the time. Also moving up the field had been the second of the GT Porsches, and that was destined to move up to third place. The airlines blowing out all that gravel in the Andretti pit, and another routine stop there for Reuter, Jones and Burt. See the seconds ticking away just above the caption there. The car running on Goodyear tyres. Meanwhile, still the work continues in Courage. Meanwhile, at the front of the field, 7 car regains the racetrack, still in the lead. Henri Pescarolo in the only untroubled Courage. He accelerates away. Henri is also a champion in helicopters. And then we had this moment between the two McLarens. That is the West car. We haven't seen much of that car in our coverage, but that had been running also well inside the top 10. Clashing here with the second of the Golf cars, driven by Lindsay Owen-Jones, Thomas Bashir at the wheel of the white and red car, and them both spinning at that first chicane where there's been a lot of incident and drama. But fortunately they were able to extract themselves from that situation, not losing very much time to continue on their way, and they were both starting to move up the field. Nissan just going through the picture as the dust dies down. And again, those marshals resorting to their hands to move the gravel out of the way. Meanwhile, Jan Lammers returns to the racetrack now, well down in something like 14th place. And that trio certainly deserved an award for perseverance. Once again, Mario Andretti had seen that dream shattered. But then we had this last-minute drama for the Yost team. Limping to a halt, the second of their 2 cars, the Fat Turbo Express sponsored machine. Some gear linkage and gear selection problems for that. There is Michele Alboreto. So here is the classification. And you notice now that that is a little out of date, as we've just seen the number 8 car pull up to a halt. But you notice the number 26 Porsche had moved back to 4th place, which was soon to be 3rd. But here the car which had led at the end of each hour, the number 7 Yost machine, it had only briefly lost its lead, occasionally in pit stops. Meanwhile, the second Golf car going very, very wide indeed, just there, and taking to the gravel as the Lister goes through. The Lister had run up as high as 12th or 13th place, but then had been beset by some mechanical problems in the closing stages, which dropped it back down the field. GT2 still led by the number 79 car. And obviously that Porsche, the GT1 machine of the Chirot organisation, having a last-minute drama and just coming back onto the racetrack in front of the Harrods McLaren. That had eventually climbed its way into the top 10, and then we had this lurid moment and slide from the Dodge Viper, the American prepared machine, just sneaking back onto the racetrack by the side of the Armco, again at Indianapolis. A lot of gravel you see on the circuit there. Now the long, fast straight and run into the Porsche curves. But let's just check out the positions as the race now with little more than 1 hour to go, still in the lead. The Yost Porsche, the factory Porsche GTs in 2nd and 3rd places, Stuck, Boutsen and Wallach leading, Fendlinger, Daumas and Goodyear by a whole 14 laps. Then the West McLaren, then the Rafanel-driven Golf McLaren, and then coming up in the closing stages into 6th place, the car which led so much to last year's race, the Harrods McLaren, Derek Bell amongst that driving lineup. Up into 7th place, indeed, was the Courage of Pescarolo, Lagos and Collard. Meanwhile, the other Courage was throwing wheels down the track, and it just went rolling and rolling and rolling. This was the car that Derek Warwick was driving. What a torrid time that he had together with Mario Andretti and Jan Lammers. And they were actually now down in 13th place, minus that front wheel, but they were determined to finish despite only having 3 wheels. Well, the car was being limped back to the pits to have that replaced. The marshals using a bit of footwork there to bring it finally to a halt. Here we see what happened. Well, the wheel coming off, but the cars are very stiff indeed, so Derek able to limp the car back to the pits at quite considerable speed. Just to go back on the story of the Yost car driven by Martini Alboreto and Didier Tays, that finally retired in the 23rd hour, and what a heartbreaker that must be with gearbox problems. The car just would not go any further. But the other Yost Porsche had no problems at all. Here it is, reeling off the final laps. The last pit stop for the 3rd place car. Dalmas, Wendlinger and Goodyear. Remember, Dalmas had won the race 3 times out of the last 4, but he couldn't make it 4 out of 5. The 25 finally going over the various cables and ropes. The Bob Wallach, Hans-Stuck, Thierry Boutsen car. Bob Wallach has said that he will come back again next year to try and win this elusive prize. Here the Raphael, Owen Jones and David Brabham driven McLaren running in 5th place. David Brabham actually at the wheel there. They'd come on strongly in the second half. It's obviously big disappointment for their teammates. The JJ Leto Bell and Weaver car, which had dropped to 9th after the long pit stop to have the gearbox repaired. Now heading home, Yost Racing have won this event twice before, and on each occasion the car carried number 7. And of course, you know by now that the car which led the race virtually throughout is number 7. It had been a good omen all along, and all 3 drivers had performed superbly. A youngster like Alex Wirth, an experienced man who had won the race before, Manuel Reuter. Half an hour to go here now. And Davy Jones, a man from America who's driven in this race a number of times before. They'd been a very well-matched trio. The car may never have been raced before, but it was very well conceived in the first place. For Porsche, of course, it would be something of a bittersweet result. They'd hoped to win with their factory-prepared GT car that bears some resemblance, perhaps, to a Porsche 911. But it wasn't to be. They had to give best to one of their customers, one of their best customers, of course, Yost Racing, a team with which they'd entrusted a car which they themselves had decided to discard. So it was indeed bittersweet. For the FINA BMW McLarens, it had been a night of dramas, a top driver lineup, but they'd all had various problems and had dropped down the field. But the Cecotto PK Sullivan car was at least heading home towards 8th place. On the Soper Lafitte Duez machine, that was destined to come in to 11th spot. But all eyes were now firmly focused on the Yost Porsche, designed by the TWR organisation, of course, designed the Jaguars, which won this race back in the late 80s. The car runs superbly by Reinhold Yost and his international team of mechanics. Many different accents and languages spoken amongst that team. Dr. Norbert Singer, the mastermind behind the GT1 car. Well, perhaps his dream was to win the race. He didn't quite make it, but 2nd and 3rd would certainly be a just reward for a project extremely well executed. There'd only been one fly in the ointment. There it is. Now heading towards the checkered flag. Meanwhile, on the last lap, the 2 Porsches ran in tandem. The leader with 354 laps behind it, coming towards the checkered flag, having raced around the clock, most of it in the lead. Alex Wirth from Germany, Davy Jones from America, and Manuel Reuter, a 2nd-time winner from Germany. And the first victory by an open-top car since 1981. Here are the best of the pursuers. the two factory Porsches. And we see a Viper limping in there, but a good result for the Vipers indeed. Price, Cobb, Bart, Dismore and Hendricks coming home in 10th spot. But let's just recap now the final positions. Victory for the Jost Porsche. 1 lap ahead of the second place, number 25 car, Wallick, Stuck and Bootsam, then Dalmas, Venlinger and Goodyear. 4th, the West McLaren, John Nielsen, Bashur and Cox. 5th, Raffanel, Owen Jones and Brabham. And in 6th place, the Harrods car of Griard, Warris and Derek Bell. For Porsche, for a Porsche-powered car, it had been the 14th success at Le Mans. For the Jost team, it was their 3rd victory they'd won in 84 and 85. And there is Bob Wallick, just see him in the picture briefly. But everyone waited for the 3 drivers who had taken the car to the overall victory. Manuel Reuter, who won it for Mercedes-Benz back in 1989. Davy Jones, and of course Alex Wurst, who became the 17th driver to win the race at his first ever attempt. The German national anthem strikes up. Some 25 of the 48 starters had made it through what had been one of the hottest Le Mans for years. Not a hint of rain, huge crowd had enjoyed a good battle, but at the end of the day, it was Deutschland über alles. Just to check out some of the lesser positions, the Pescarola, Lagos, Collard, Courage finished in 7th place. Chicotto, Piquet and Sullivan were 8th in their Bugatti McLaren. Leto, Belm and Weaver, after their gearbox problems and a possible 3rd place, eventually finished 9th. Cobb, Dismore and Hendricks, the best of the front engine cars with their Viper. Soper, Lafitte and Duez were 11th, and Kelleners, Eichmann and Martinoli finished 12th, winning GT2. And as for Mario Andretti, Jan Lammers and Derek Warwick, they eventually came home 13th. But this race had been about the Jost team, about Davy Jones, Manuel Reuter and Alex Wurst. They certainly hadn't started as favourites. In fact, few people expected this untried car to last the distance. They surprised absolutely everyone and came home the victors, the class of the field. And now all that was left was the celebrations.
Monsieur Franck Muller démontre Franck Muller, partenaire notamment de l'équipe de Gémois, Rodé, et Alexander Wurst.